On February 1st, 2013, 21-year-old Elisa Lam was reported missing in Los Angeles, California. Her last known location, the Stay on Main Hotel, formerly known as the Hotel Cecil, a location which has been shrouded in death and synonymous with mystery for decades. The Hotel Cecil itself has been home to at least 16 known deaths since its inception in 1924. After Elisa went missing, there began a nearly 3-week-long investigation into Elisa Lam's life, the hotel, staff, and guests, which led to incredibly eerie and concerning evidence being uncovered. After several guest complaints of the hotel water tasting off, flooded rooms, and low water pressure, the maintenance staff made a seemingly routine visit to the 4 cisterns that towered atop the hotel. And on February 19, 2013, Elisa Lam's body was discovered naked, floating inside one of the water towers. This gruesome discovery raised even more questions and possible conspiracies, many which have remained largely unanswered to this day. This is the story of Elisa Lam and the Cecil Hotel. Let's do a deep dive. So, the Cecil Hotel. Today is a very special episode that I've been wanting to cover for a very long time because the Cecil Hotel is just one of those places. It is one of the most mysterious places in America. As a person who has been a paranormal investigator for a decade now, the Cecil Hotel is one of those places that I've heard so many things about. I've read in depth about Elisa Lam's story, about Richard Ramirez's connection, all of the different killers and murders and deaths that have happened in the hotel. We're going to cover that in a second. And it's very, very interesting because I recently visited the Cecil. It's a Friday right now when I'm recording this, and just last Saturday, I was inside of the Cecil and I saw this firsthand. I talked to people who live there, and it's just as dark as you can imagine that it is. It is a horrific, negative, evil energy inside of that building. It is depressing. It feels anxious. It's just so bad. It's hard to even describe how bad it is to you. The violence that happens there to this day. The woman that we were interviewing who lives there, she's lived there for 2 years, and she said that just in those 2 years that she's lived there, she said maybe somewhere between 16, 18 to 30 people have died and been taken out of the hotel just while she's been there, mainly from drug overdoses. But like just recently, a couple of weeks ago, as of right now when I'm recording this video, there was a dead body found inside one of the rooms of the Cecil. And when the police actually opened up the door, they discovered that a man had been living in that room with the dead body for a full week while it was decomposing, because they were so strung out on whatever substance they had that they just didn't see anything wrong with that. So yeah, this is some really disturbing stuff. But to really get into this story of Elisa and what happened, we can't even begin to unpack it without first diving into the history and infamy of the Cecil Hotel. So the Hotel Cecil opened its doors in 1924, situated on what was then a trendy section of Main Street in downtown Los Angeles. The hotel was named after the famed Cecil Hotel in London, which was one of the world's top hotels at the time. Interestingly enough, the Royal Air Force was actually formed there at the hotel in 1918. While smaller than its London namesake, the Los Angeles version of the Cecil boasted 700 rooms and catered to tourists and business travelers alike. Its location was really prime real estate, just steps away from the downtown hub for the Pacific Electric streetcar system, which made it easy for business travelers to reach nearly any part of Los Angeles. Central Station, the main terminus for Los Angeles, was just a short walk to the east, and downtown LA itself was thriving at the time. Before corporate giants took over, the area was a bustling ecosystem of diverse companies. Southern California alone was home to numerous banks, small department stores, independent oil companies, and of course, the film industry. The region at the time was a hive of manufacturing, shipbuilding, and construction. So the people of LA were doing really well. They had a nice, clean city, and now they had this huge, grand hotel right downtown. It was a huge building back then. For these countless local businesses, having a prestigious office downtown was a must to impress clients and competitors alike. The Hotel Cecil, with its proximity to these corporate hubs and the nearby bustling Broadway district with its stores, restaurants, and theaters, was a magnet for business travelers and tourists. But the good times didn't last. Just 5 years after it opened, the Wall Street crash of 1929 and the ensuing Great Depression sent Main Street into a downward spiral, eventually merging into the growing Skid Row. And this was just the beginning of the hotel's troubles. In 1939, Union Station opened, moving LA's main train terminal a couple of miles north and leading to the closure of Central Station. Then in 1950, the Pacific Electric Building also closed its terminus. As downtown LA began to lose its luster, many companies relocated to other parts of Southern California, making a downtown office less desirable. There was also a glaring oversight in the Cecil's original business plan. The hotel had no parking for cars. When it was designed around 1920, parking wasn't a consideration for city hotels. But car ownership in Southern California boomed in the 1920s, creating a growing traffic problem that made getting out of downtown a headache. By 1961, all the streetcar lines were gone, leaving the Cecil isolated in an increasingly unfashionable, hard to reach, and dangerous part of town. The hotel's lack of parking and dwindling public transport options forced a shift in the business model. You see, without easy access, the Cecil's only viable customers were long-term tenants without cars, which led to those tenants being mostly low-income residents. Over time, the hotel became a refuge for those living on the fringes of society, drawn in by its central location and extremely cheap rent. Nowadays, we just talked to somebody, it's $250 a month to get a room at the Cecil, which is crazy cheap, especially downtown LA. By the 1950s, however, the Hotel Cecil had already started to gain a reputation unlike any other in Los Angeles, which made it even harder for the owners of the business to turn things around. The hotel quickly became known for death, murder, and violence. It's possible that there's a correlation between the Great Depression and the numerous in the 30s, but there have been 16 reported deaths within the hotel and countless police calls and reports of unsavory activity all throughout the hotel's history. So let's examine some of these listed bizarre deaths from inside of the Cecil. The first really recorded death that I could dig up occurred in November of 1931. During that month, a man named W.K. Norton was found dead in his hotel room in the Cecil after ingesting poisonous capsules. Just a week before his death, he had checked into the Cecil Hotel using the fake name James Willies from Chicago. We still don't know why the fake name, what happened with him, but he's the first really recorded death that sets all of this stuff off. Then, less than a year later, in September of 1932, Benjamin Dodich dies from a gunshot wound to the head. A maid actually found Benjamin dead from that gunshot wound to the head inside of his room. He appeared to have taken his own life, and he did not leave any note or explanation as to why he did so. The next death was a little over a year later in July of 1934. This was the death of Sergeant Louis D. Borden. In late July 1934, former Army Medical Corps Sergeant Borden was found dead in his room at the Cecil after having slashed his throat with a razor. Now, Sergeant Borden actually, in contrast to other people, had left several notes, which cited poor health as the reason why he was choosing to take his own life. Already, as you can see, that is 4 people that took their own lives in less than 5 years in the Cecil, and it wouldn't get any better soon. March of 1937, Grace E. Magro died from falling off the building. Magro fell or jumped from a 9th-story window, but shockingly on the way down, Magro's body got wrapped up in telephone wires. That's right, she jumped onto the wires and they gruesomely wrapped around her body, caught her up, cut her up. There was blood and other, internal organs laying everywhere on the pavement. I can imagine it was a truly disturbing sight. She later on died at the hospital, and the police were unable to determine whether her death was an accident or she had taken her own life or if she had possibly been pushed. Still to this day, nobody knows what happened. Then in May of 1939, Irwin C. Neblett was found dead in his hotel room at the Cecil after, once again, he had ingested poison. People don't know if he was trying to take his life, what exactly happened, but this trend of people coming to the Cecil Hotel to die is just going to continue. January of 1940, less than a year after the last death, a woman named Dorothy Seeger dies at the Cecil Hotel. Dorothy was a teacher who registered at the hotel under the pseudonym Evelyn Brent. She then ingested poison on January 10, 1940, and was reported by the LA Times to be near death when the police arrived. Beforehand, Dorothy had sent her relatives a note indicating that she was planning on ending her life. And yes, Dorothy eventually succumbed to the effects of the poison at a local hospital. So I don't know what the deal was with all these people coming to the Cecil to poison themselves, but it's really bizarre stuff. And when we get to September of 1944, we get to one of the most disturbing events, in my opinion, in the history of the Cecil, the tale of Dorothy Jean Purcell. Now, in September of 1944, Dorothy Jean's newborn infant was thrown from the window of their hotel room. Now, at the time, Dorothy Jean Purcell was sharing a room at the Cecil with her then boyfriend, a man named Ben Levine, who was 38 years old and a shoe salesman. Dorothy had apparently been completely unaware that she was pregnant. She had spent the last 9-8 months completely unaware that she was with child. And so when she was in the room at the Cecil that night in September of 1944, Dorothy suddenly went into labor. After this all happened, she later testified that she didn't want to disrupt her boyfriend, who was sleeping at the time, so she went into the bathroom of her hotel room by herself and gave birth to the baby boy. But something wasn't right about the child. It wasn't crying and breathing like Dorothy thought it was supposed to, and so sadly and mistakenly, she thought that she had had a stillbirth and that her baby was dead. And so Dorothy took her baby and threw it out of the window of her hotel room. It then landed on the roof of an adjacent building and died. Dorothy was later charged with murder, and 3 psychiatrists testified that she was mentally confused at the time of the incident. In January of 1945, she was found not guilty by reason of insanity. November of 1947, a man named Robert Smith once again jumps from the building and takes his own life. He jumps from one of the Cecil's 7th floor windows. October 1954, a woman named Helen Gurney once again jumps from the building and takes her own life. Helen was a stationery firm employee from San Francisco, and she jumped from the window of her 7th floor room and landed on top of the marquee. You know, the sign that says Hotel Cecil on the side of the building. She actually jumped and landed on that thing, that sign, and that's where her body sat. 1 week before, she had checked in at the hotel under the name Margaret Brown. I don't know what's up with all of these pseudonyms that people check in under. It's really, really bizarre. February of 1962, a woman named Julia Frances Moore once again jumps from the building to her death. Julia had jumped from the window of her 8th floor room and landed in a 2nd-story interior light well, which seems like a horrific, painful death. Julia did not leave a suicide note, but amongst her possessions were a bus ticket from St. Louis, 59 cents in change, and an Illinois bank book showing that she had $1,800 to her name. October 1962, that same year, a woman named Pauline Otten takes her own life at the hotel and sadly takes someone with her in the process. Now, this is one of the most bizarre things that you're going to hear about the Cecil. This is a story that seems straight out of some fictional book or film, but this indeed really did happen in real life. So, Pauline Otten, she knew she wanted to die, and for some reason, just like so many others, she was drawn to the Cecil as a place where she would, kill herself. So on that day in October of 1962, Pauline climbed up to her 9th floor room. She had an argument with her estranged husband, Dewey Otten, and then Pauline opened up the window and jumped from the 9th floor. Now, interestingly, her estranged husband, Dewey, had left the room just a few moments before she took her own life. We can assume that they had been arguing. He stepped out of the room and then she decided that it's over and she was going to jump. Sadly though, Pauline landed on a pedestrian, a man named George Gianni, killing both of them instantly. That's right, she actually landed on top of a pedestrian and killed them. As there were no witnesses to this event, nobody saw this whole thing happen. When the police arrived on scene, they initially thought that Pauline and George had taken their lives together in some sort of a pact. However, it was soon determined that George had his hands in his pocket when he died, and he was still wearing his shoes. Had he have jumped from his room, his shoes would have likely fallen off during the fall or upon impact, and his hands would not have been in his pockets. So yeah, you have someone trying to take their own life from the hotel, and they end up also taking someone else's with them. So just a lot of strange, terrible things happening at the Cecil. Then in June of 1964, there's the death of Pigeon Goldie Osgood, who was raped and murdered in the Cecil. In June of 1964, a hotel worker discovered Pigeon Goldie, a retired telephone operator, dead in her room. She had been stabbed, beaten, and raped, and her room was ransacked. There was blood everywhere. It was a brutal, gruesome scene. Pigeon Goldie was well known around the area and had earned her nickname because she fed birds in nearby Pershing Square, pigeons to be exact. Near her body was the Los Angeles Dodgers cap that she always wore and a paper sack full of birdseed that she was planning to throw out to the birds later. Hours after her murder, a man named Jacques B. Ellinger was seen walking through Pershing Square, the same place where Pigeon Goldie used to go love to feed the pigeons, in bloodstained clothing. He was arrested and charged with her murder, but was later found not guilty and cleared of the crime. To this day, Pigeon Goldie's murder remains unsolved. In December of 1975, Allison Lowell died from once again jumping from the building. But what's interesting is that woman who jumped and died, her name really wasn't Allison Lowell. In fact, to this day, nobody knows who she is. She still technically remains unidentified. She had checked in on December 16th of that year under the name Allison Lowell, staying in room 327. She jumped from there, but no one knows who she is. Then in September of 1992, another John Doe died from jumping from the building. This time, the body of an African-American man was found in the alley behind the Cecil, and immediately the police assumed that he had either fallen, jumped, or been pushed from the hotel's 15th floor. That's quite the drop. The 20 to 30-year-old male, like I said before, has never been identified. Then in the 2000s, the body of a 28-year-old man was found outside of the Cecil Hotel. Some people believed he may have taken his own life by jumping from the hotel, although a spokesperson for the county coroner informed the LA Times the cause of death had not been determined. That man remains unidentified. There's also a lot of speculation surrounding a lot of these deaths, and many of them are not entirely straightforward cases, which adds to the mystery behind the incidents that occur in the hotel. I mean, did all these people really take their own lives? Were some of these people pushed? Were some people forced to take this poison? Did they not know? I don't really even know what to think of all of that, but it is crazy. You see, Amy Price, the Hotel Cecil's manager from 2007 to 2017, has claimed in later interviews that there were over 80 deaths that happened just while she was working there in the stretch of a decade. It's also interesting to note that many people died from falling from the building. And you'd think that it would be way more difficult or nearly impossible to access the top of the building after all these deaths, but somehow Elisa Lam did. You see, in 2008, after all of these occurrences, a pair of local longtime residents of the Cecil Hotel gave it an ominous new nickname in the press. They called it the Hotel, and this name has stuck many years later. There have also been some extremely infamous guests who have visited and stayed at the Cecil Hotel, so let's talk about them. First, there was the Black Dahlia. In January of 1947, Elizabeth Short, known as the Black Dahlia, disappeared. Just 6 days later, her body was found mutilated in sections all across Los Angeles. It's been heavily rumored that Elizabeth Short frequented the Cecil Hotel bar and that was one of the last places she had visited before she was found dead. Then, in 1980, the Cecil Hotel was home to serial killer Richard Ramirez, aka the Night Stalker. Now, Richard was never blamed for any of the deaths that occurred at the hotel, but it is theorized that he did a lot of his killing during the time that he was staying there. You see, as it turned out, the Night Stalker Richard Ramirez was a regular presence in the Skid Row area. Throughout his life, he had been a drug addict and had battled demons of his own for many years before he turned to killing. But because of the Cecil's close approximate location to Skid Row, it just made sense that he would choose the hotel to spend time at in between or during his murder sprees. According to a hotel clerk who had known him, Richard Ramirez stayed at the Cecil for a few weeks and supposedly committed a good chunk of his Los Angeles murders while he was staying there. Now, according to people who used to work at the Cecil, they've claimed that they saw Richard stripping off his bloody clothing in the alleyway outside of the building before he would climb the interior stairs to his residence, still wearing his blood-stained underwear. So he would take off his bloody clothing in the alleyway and then walk all the way up to his room covered in blood, wearing only his underwear. I mean, what a crazy sight. On August 30th, 1985, a group of Los Angeles residents spotted Richard Ramirez in the street and stopped him from escaping until the police arrived to arrest him. And in 1989, he was convicted of 13 murders and sentenced to death, although he would ultimately die of cancer in 2013. An article that I found online from moviemaker.com actually goes into a little detail about the connections between Ramirez and the Cecil. Here's a little portion of that article. One former Cecil resident described the hotel at the time as a lawless place, one that was so chaotic, serial killers felt comfortable calling it home. Back in the 80s, I would never go no farther than the 6th floor. The resident, Kenneth Givens, says in Vanishing, usually the higher floors of the Cecil, people used to get killed up in there. Once they got a guy in the room, they would rob him, beat him up, and throw him out the window. So if you didn't watch yourself, you might come flying out of there with no wings." End quote. Richard Ramirez's room was on the 14th floor, but as far as we know, the Night Stalker never brought any of his victims back to the hotel. It was simply a safe place for him to return to after committing murders. This is another quote. "It's one of those hotels that's well known for this type of crime. The Cecil Hotel is where serial killers, let their hair down," says Kim Cooper, an author and Los Angeles true crime tour guide for Esoteric, who was interviewed in Vanishing. One was a figure who stayed upstairs on the 14th floor, paying $14 a night for his room. He liked to scare, torture, torment, kill, rape human beings. She's talking about Richard Ramirez, of course. On at least one occasion, he had actually removed someone's eyes as his human trophies. And then after committing some of the most brutal murders that happened in Southern California ever, he would come back to the Cecil. She added, in the middle of the night, he would be in the back alley covered in blood, taking off his clothing. Fellow LA historian and esoteric guide Richard Shave also described Ramirez's habit of walking up the stairs to his room in his blood-stained underwear, barefoot, after discarding his bloody clothing outside. Cooper added, and that's cool, and no one's got a problem with that because it's that kind of a heavy place. So shout out to the author of that article. It was a great, insightful article. There's actually a room inside of the Cecil that has gotten itself the ominous nickname of the Richard Ramirez room, the room where he was rumored to have stayed during his murder spree. And according to those who have visited said room, people that I know, there are still some bloodstains visible on the walls and floor. But I never went there, so that's all I can really say. Then, in 1991, Austrian serial killer Jack Unterweger stayed at the hotel and killed at least 3 prostitutes while staying there. You see, just after Unterweger checked into the Cecil, sex workers started dying in brutal ways across the city of Los Angeles. But Jack's killer crime spree actually started in his home country, Austria, decades earlier, in the 1970s. When Jack Unterweger showed up in Los Angeles, people saw him as an Austrian journalist on some sort of an assignment. But beneath that veneer was a man with a sinister past. Back in 1974, he had abducted and strangled 18-year-old Margaret Schaefer with her own bra. And by 1976, he had been sentenced to life in prison for that murder. But Jack Unterweger didn't want to waste his time behind bars. He started writing short stories, poems, plays, and even an autobiography titled Purgatory, or The Trip to Prison, Report of a Guilty Man. The book eventually inspired a documentary, and Jack's literary success from prison earned him parole in 1990, and from there, his writing career skyrocketed. He became a fixture at bookstore readings, talk shows, and his works were even celebrated in schools. Even Austrian radio played his children's stories. Jack went from a murderer to being ultra famous and wealthy. Now, just before Jack's big move to the United States, a dark shadow started to spread across Europe. In September 1990, Blanka Bakova, a sex worker in Prague, was found strangled with her underwear. And over the next 6 months, 7 more prostitutes met the same fate in Jack's home country of Austria. After all of these women died, Unterweger then made his way to Los Angeles, supposedly to study the red light district. He even managed to get a ride-along with the LAPD, getting an official tour of the seedy underbelly of downtown. And of course, he set up shop at the infamous Cecil Hotel. And soon afterwards, 3 sex workers, Shannon Exley, Irene Rodriguez, and Peggy Jean Booth, were found strangled with their bras tied with the same signature knot that had become Unterweger's calling card. Back in Austria, police had been watching Jack, suspecting his involvement in the recent murders, and they finally had enough evidence to arrest him. But by the time they arrived at his home, Jack had vanished, slipping away with his girlfriend, Bianca Marac, through Switzerland and France. He stayed on the run until 1992, when he was finally caught in Miami, Florida. Extradited back to Austria, Jack faced charges for 11 murders, and the jury found him guilty of 9. In 1994, he was sentenced to life in prison without the chance of parole, but Jack wasn't going to let anyone else have the final say. That very night, he ended his own life in the Graz Carlisle prison, thus bringing Jack Unterweger's reign of terror to an end. And obviously, with all of this death, murder, with these and bizarre events that have happened at the Cecil, the place has a pretty robust supernatural history. And it's easy to believe why. I mean, the hotel is drenched in negative, evil energy, in the location that attracts death and suffering. The deaths that occur there at the Cecil are theorized by some to be the result of negative supernatural energy that lingers on within the location. And I think that's what it is. After visiting the place and talking to people, I think that the Cecil Hotel is like a big, negative, evil magnet that attracts everything negative and evil and dark about the world. It pulls these people in to take their own lives. It pulls I mean, what hotel have you ever heard of with that many deaths, multiple serial killers, all these bizarre events? To this day, deaths and murders happening every single month of year. And then Elisa Lam. I mean, yeah, I think that it's like its own character. I would describe the Cecil as its own character in its story. It's like an entity that's alive and well. Kind of like the hotel in The Shining, the Overlook Hotel, how Stephen King has stated, it's not even the ghosts that are really haunted, it's the hotel itself. The hotel is its own evil, negative being. It's kind of how I view the Cecil. Now, the Cecil closed its doors in 2017 for renovations and to begin preserving the historical architecture after it was voted a historical cultural monument. However, work paused during the COVID-19 pandemic, and in December of 2021, it was reopened as an affordable housing complex operated by the Skid Row Housing Trust. The facility provides affordable living accommodations for up to 600 low-income residents. And in April of 2022, controversy struck when the famous Cecil Hotel room rate advertisement that had been emblazoned on the side of the building for almost a century was illegally painted over. As of August 2024, about half of the hotel was full of residents, and it's expected that those numbers will rise as Skid Row Housing Trust acquires more resources. And that's what it was when we went there. We had to sneak into the building through security and have some help, but it's pretty much all people who were unhoused at one point or are pretty much unhoused. Drug addiction is rampant in there, mental health issues just from the stuff that we saw. It's not like the Cecil Hotel that you would imagine that it would be. But let's talk about Elisa Lam. Elisa Lam was the daughter of Hong Kong immigrants and was living in Vancouver at the time of her trip to Los Angeles. Previously, she had been a student at the University of British Columbia, although she was not enrolled at the time of her trip to LA. It's theorized that Elisa had dropped out sometime before her trip or was possibly taking a break. Now, Elisa was an aspiring blog writer who would post about models, fashion, quotes, and accounts of her life, which included discussions on her mental health. Now, Elisa had two known blogs, one created in 2010 on Blogspot named Etherfields, and another one made 2 years later on Tumblr named Nouvelle Nouveau. Although Elisa's family was private about her mental health, she discussed some of her struggles online, noting that she had dropped several classes due to a relapse in 2012. She quoted novelist Chuck Palahniuk stating that she felt so utterly directionless and lost, and you're always haunted by the idea that you're wasting your life. Now, Elisa Lam was diagnosed with bipolar disorder and depression and was prescribed several medications that she took regularly at the time of her death, including Wellbutrin, Lamotrigine, Quetiapine, Excedrin, Spansul, and venlafaxine. I totally slaughtered some of those names. I've never even seen some of those words. But Elisa's family claimed that she had no suicidal ideations. Although she did previously write on her blog, today has been one of those blah days full of apathy. Really dangerous too. I can see myself feeling suicidal, and it always scares me when I start feeling suicidal. She also wrote, "Depression sucks, period. If someone says to you that they have depression, don't ask why. There is no why. Tell them every day you love them. Remind them every day. It will get better." Now, in the past before the Cecil Hotel incident, Elisa Lam had been hospitalized at least once due to mental illness, and she had a long history of not taking her medication properly. When this happened, she would often experience hallucinations that would cause her to hide, and she was hospitalized at least once for one of these episodes. Now, on this specific trip, Elisa was traveling alone to California, presumably as a tourist from San Diego to Santa Cruz, but made a stop in Los Angeles. Elisa checked into the hotel on January 26, 2013, and planned to check out on January 31st to continue her travel to Santa Cruz. While she was staying at the hotel, she contacted her parents every day, up until the day that she disappeared, which was supposed to be her checkout date on January 31st, 2013. It should be noted that Elisa never officially checked out of the hotel. Now, later that day, when she failed to check in with her family, they immediately contacted the LAPD, and they flew down to help with the search. Sadly, Elisa Lam was officially reported missing on February 1st, 2013. Something to note here, and why it's been hard for people to get evidence, or why it was hard back then, is that there are no security cameras located on the floor that Elisa Lam was staying on, so it was hard for officers to track her movements to see where she had gone or what she had been up to. And on January 27th, a couple days before she went missing, Elisa had posted on her blog expressing unwanted attention from men in the area, stating, "I'm going out tonight. I really hope no creeper comes near me. Seriously though. Those Italian and Mexican guys go after you strong." Elisa was initially booked into a shared room. However, she was moved to a private room due to erratic behavior on January 30th. Elisa was allegedly locking her roommates out and telling them they couldn't enter without a password, as well as leaving notes telling them to go away and go home. Now, hotel staff, who claimed to see Elisa in the days surrounding, noted she was traveling alone. However, some reports state that there is CCTV footage from the elevators that captured her with two men who gave her a box. It's unclear who those men were, but the box appeared to be from The Last Bookstore, a local shop. The men, to this day, have never been identified. The owner said that Elisa was outgoing, very lively, and very friendly, and was discussing getting books for her friends and family, and books that might be a little too heavy for her to travel with. The owner claimed it appeared she had plans to go home and see her friends and family. She was preparing to return. The last time anyone saw Elisa alive was when she was caught in an area of the hotel where guests were not supposed to be. She was asked to leave by hotel staff and was last seen walking towards the elevator. Phone records indicated that Elisa had planned to meet up with a man, but had never showed up. The man had an alibi that cleared him as a suspect from the case, that should be noted. Elisa's blog was still running after she had gone missing, making people believe that she might have still been alive. The last post went up in December 2013. While it was never confirmed, many believed her blog continued to post through the queue feature, where users could queue posts for a later date. While some personal items were located in her hotel room, Elisa's phone was never known to be found during the investigation. On February 13, 2013, the police released CCTV footage of the last known sighting of Elisa Lam. This was a 2.5-minute long video which was taken on February 1st, 2013 from the hotel elevator. In the video, Elisa is seen acting incredibly strange and erratic. She appears to be popping in and out of the elevator, as if to be hiding from someone, and is pressing every button on the elevator panel. She's seen waving her hands and moving in and out. When the door does not close, she exits the elevator. The door then closes sometime after she exits. No one else is visible in the video besides Elisa, and it should be noted that looks like she's staring at people or things all around her. Obviously, this footage went incredibly viral, and many viewers found it unsettling to watch. Theories began to emerge almost immediately as it gained traction, with some theorizing that it looked like she was hiding and trying to get away from someone, and that she had been trying to get the elevator door to close, which is why she was pressing buttons. Others theorized that she looked like she was under the influence of hallucinogens, or that she was suffering from some sort of psychosis. Some claim that the footage was tampered with before being made public because the timestamp is obscured in the video. It was also theorized that the footage was sped up or slowed down and that some of it was missing. It appears around the 2:57 mark that the elevator door seems to jump around. This could have been done to protect the identity of someone who was in the video, related or unrelated to the disappearance. But one of the most chilling theories is the Korean elevator game. Now, some people theorize that Elisa could have been participating in this game called the Korean elevator game, which has some complicated and intricate rules. The game is basically an urban legend intended to take you to another world in which you may not return if you don't follow a very strict set of instructions. Now, for weeks after Elisa went missing, people who were staying in the hotel began to complain about the water tasting off, the water pressure not working, the water being discolored. People were saying there was this funky, rotten taste to the water and that something was just off with the water tank, and that the water was dark in color and looked rotted, almost like mud. And so, on the morning of February 19th, 2013, maintenance worker Santiago Lopez went atop the Cecil Hotel to check on the 4 water towers. He then opened up the water tank and discovered Elisa Lam's naked body floating in one of the 4 1,000-gallon tanks, a tank which provided water to guest rooms, a kitchen, and a coffee shop. Once again, like I just said, Elisa's body had been found naked, with her clothing also floating in the water. The clothing in the water looked similar to those in the elevator footage and was coated with sand-like particulate. Her watch and room key were also found in the tank. There was no reported evidence of any foul play, that is, physical trauma or sexual assault, or on Elisa's body, making it highly unlikely that she was dragged into the water tower. People have said maybe she was murdered and put in there, but wouldn't there be some sort of bruise or some sort of marking anywhere on her body? Toxicology reports indicated traces of medication which was prescribed to her, as well as over-the-counter medications Sinutab and ibuprofen. She had a very small amount of alcohol in her system, 0.02%, but no other recreational drugs. Investigators noticed that the concentration of the prescription medication in her system indicated that she was under-medicating or had stopped taking her medications recently. This corresponded with the fact that it appeared she had more medication in her room than she should have compared to the fill date. Some information on the autopsy report was incomplete. It did not say if or when results of the rape or fingernail kit were processed. Records indicate subcutaneous pooling of blood in Lam's anal area, which some suggested was a sign of sexual abuse or anal rape. However, this also could have been a result of bloating in the course of the body's decomposition. Now, immediately after Elisa's body was found, the police knew they had to search the hotel, and they searched the entire hotel to the fullest extent that they legally could. Meaning, the police couldn't go into every room in the hotel because there was no probable cause that a crime had been committed in these rooms. Elisa's room appeared to be messy, however, there was no sign of forced entry. Doors and stairs that led to the water tower are locked, and only the staff has access via passcodes and keys. And bizarrely, any attempt by a resident or a guest at the hotel to access the water towers and the roof would have immediately triggered an alarm, which none of the staff members that night recalled hearing. The only way to bypass those security measures would be to go through the hotel's fire escape. Search dogs went through Elisa's room and through the rooftop, but were unsuccessful in tracking her scent to the water towers. Her scent was lost near a window that connected to the hotel's fire escape. It was questioned, though, how Elisa could access the inside of the cistern. There was no permanent access to them, and hotel workers themselves had to use a ladder that they would bring up there to get up and look down into the water. The cisterns, or water tanks, were also protected by heavy, very well secured lids. Many wonder how Elisa Lam, a small, petite woman, could have crawled up there, opened up those heavy lids, and crawled into the water tank all by herself. Now, the hotel employee who found Elisa's body said that the lid was open at the time of him finding her body, meaning that it was not closed behind her when she was inside. It's speculated that she may have entered the cistern when the water levels were low and became unable to escape as the water levels rose when the tank was refilled. Now, June 20th, 2013. Elisa's cause of death was ruled to be accidental due to drowning, with her bipolar disorder being a major factor in her death. The case is considered closed. On September 20th, 2013, Elisa's parents filed a lawsuit claiming the hotel was negligent and caused wrongful death due to the fact that they did not anticipate the water tanks to be a threat to guests, and the lids were not locked. On December 14th, 2014, the lawsuit was dismissed. The judge ruled that it would not have been foreseeable for a hotel guest to fall into the water tanks, as no guests were allowed on the roof of the hotel. The judge also stated that the fact Elisa would have had to climb up a ladder to access the water tanks would not have indicated to her that she was not supposed to be up on the tanks. It's interesting for them to admit that she would need a ladder to climb in, yet there's still no confirmation on how she got into the tank on her own. I don't know if they found a ladder up there or what, but I mean, there wasn't a ladder by the entrance when they found Elisa. Here's a couple theories. There's the mental health theories. Elisa was experiencing at the time, according to this theory, a severe manic episode due to her not taking her medications properly. This manic episode led to hallucinations, which she had experienced before, which explain that elevator footage and may explain why she felt the need to flee to the water towers. Elisa, according to this theory, was trying to take her own life. She had a history of depression and may have seeked out the water tower to drown herself. However, it didn't appear at the time that Elisa had any suicidal thoughts or ideations. She hadn't told anybody that she was thinking about taking her own life. She hadn't written about it on her mental health blog. She hasn't reached out to anybody. She was telling the bookstore owner, buying stuff to bring back to her friends and family, talking about how she's excited to go home. Doesn't add up. The theory also states that Elisa was on a concoction of drugs that may not have shown up on toxicology reports or were out of her system by the time she was found. Could these additional drugs that Elisa may have been on have played into her mental faculties failing? I don't really know. There's also the murder theories. Now, many questions still surround how Elisa got into the tank without any help and why she was naked. She had spoken on her blog about wanting to meet new people and getting unwanted attention from men, as well as having plans to meet with someone that night. Is it possible that she could have actually met with someone who harbored bad intentions? You see, the hotel was located on Skid Row, an incredibly dangerous and high-crime area. At the time, the hotel worked as an apartment stay for people who couldn't pay their deposits. Because of this, the hotel at the time sometimes attracted criminals, people who were on the run, or people who had just left prison and couldn't live anywhere else. The hotel faced lots of security and safety issues and had, quote, thousands of 911 calls a year, end quote. A detective says they had around 3 calls a day to, quote, hell on earth scenes, end quote, unfolding there at the Cecil. It may have been that Elisa ran into someone in the hotel who meant to cause her harm, especially if she was unwell and vulnerable due to her mental illness. A hotel staff member could have been involved. As mentioned, there are still many questions surrounding how Elisa not only got up to the roof, but how she managed to get into that damn tank. It's physically impossible. People also cite the potentially edited elevator footage when they're talking about this theory. Was there a staff member who may have been involved in her death who isn't speaking the full truth? There's also the tuberculosis theory. You see, a theory began on Reddit that believed that Elisa was the test subject for a new tuberculosis medication. This Reddit post states, quote, after she was found, a huge outbreak of a unique drug-resistant TB occurred in the same area of her disappearance. How do you diagnose TB? With a LAM-ELISA test. Lam-Elisa test. LAM enzyme-linked immunosorbent assay, ELISA. Eerily enough, there was an outbreak in downtown LA's Skid Row. A hotel manager confirmed that there was indeed that outbreak of TB within guests, and that they did need to be tested after visiting. This was around the same time of her disappearance. There was also a large and highly acclaimed TB testing center at the university Lam attended. Theorists believe that she may have known too much and was killed. Then there's also the supernatural theories. The Cecil Hotel itself. Many people claim that the hotel has dark forces that lie within. With its dark history of murders and violence, it's no surprise people may want to link Elisa's death to its history. Some people believe that there was a sinister energy guiding Elisa to her death. Many refer to the elevator footage, in which it looks like she may be talking to spirits. Also interesting to note is that the elevator does not move or close during the entire video until Lam exits the elevator. People believe spirits and negative forces may have been holding the door open so she would exit out to the roof instead of return downstairs. And based on what I heard from people's mouths, this documentary will be on my YouTube channel, The Paranormal Files, soon. I believe that the hotel is alive and it can almost control people like puppets. You'll see what I'm talking about in my YouTube video. That's just my own theory. But there's also that Korean elevator game that we talked about earlier. Some people believe she may have been taking part in this frightening dimension hopping game, and that something went wrong within the game that led to her death. Another theory is called the Dark Waters theory. Many claim that Elisa's murder was incredibly similar to the movie Dark Waters. The film's plot is shockingly similar to Elisa's death, where hotel guests find flooding in their room due to a body that was in the water tank. The movie trailer even features a malfunctioning elevator, similar to Lam's elevator footage video. While it seems like the most likely answer to Elisa's death is that she suffered from some sort of psychotic episode, there are still some pieces of her story that remained unanswered. Like, how did she get into the tank? Why was she completely naked? Why is there no other remaining footage other than that single piece of elevator footage? What else may have happened at the hotel that was never made public? What is to be made of the permeating dark history of the Cecil? Is it just tragic coincidence? Or is it a deadly mixture of location, circumstance, and copycat murders? Could it be that the Cecil Hotel really harbors negative energies and forces that push people to commit murder or suicide? Or that it's really just a microcosm for its surrounding environment? Those are questions to which we'll never truly have answers. Now, today was a bit of a shorter episode. Thank you everybody for joining me on this journey. If you want to watch our investigation of the Cecil Hotel, it is going to be on the Paranormal Files YouTube channel my other channel. We paid off security guards to get in there, and we were given unfiltered access to the hotel for an extended period of time. We got to talk to residents. We went up to the roof area. We visited all the rooms from this story, took the elevator, and I can't even remember I don't know who the last person was to get footage in there, but it has gone significantly downhill and is incredibly dangerous. The security guards even warned us that if we have a knife, we should bring it into the hotel with us to defend ourselves. And they said they don't even go on other floors unless they have multiple people with them. But with all that said, guys, thank you so much for listening. Thank you to everybody. If you want to check the resources and where we got this information for this episode, check the link in the description of this show. I'll be back next week, next Wednesday, with another crazy episode of the Conspiracy Files. I hope you enjoyed this kind of little paranormal, supernatural side quest that we had here. I thought this was a great episode. But yeah, keep that tinfoil hat on. Keep asking those hard questions, and I'll catch you on the next one.